friends, what about the mark of the beast? Now we've come to the mark of the beast. Does the mark of the beast have to do also with God's law in some way? Well, let's find out. Let's come back here now to Revelation 14, verse 9. If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark and his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And then look at verse 12, friends. After describing the mark of the beast on the forehead and in the hand, he turns and says, here is the patience of the saints. After looking over now to those who had the mark of the beast and describing them, he turns the other way and says, here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God. In other words, friends, the ones who had the mark of the beast were not keeping the commandments of God, obviously, because he turns right around to describe his own people, the saints, by saying, here are they that keep the commandments of God. The others were not, the ones with the mark of the beast. So this seems to indicate that the mark of the beast also has something to do with God's law. Well, it probably does, because we're talking about two things that are competing with each other. They're in the same arena. They're diametrically opposed to each other, but they're still in the same arena in competition. Now, there's no competition between a railroad and a lumber yard, is there? But there is competition between a railroad and a bus line, because they're operating in the same field. And these two things, my friends, that go into the forehead are operating in the same field. Both of them have to do with loyalty. Both of them have to do with the law of God. And so it has to do then with God's law, just like the seal had to do with God's law. Now, I want you to look at our list here for just a moment. Look at these 10 points of identification. Notice point number 8. This power of the beast is going to try, remember, think to change. Think to change what? Times and laws, you see. Not only to change the law of God, but to change time as well. Now tell me, friends, where is time mentioned in the law of God? There's only one place that time is mentioned, and that's the fourth commandment. The fourth commandment that says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And the prophecy here is that the beast power is going to try to change time in the law. And that means that it's got to try to change the Sabbath commandment as well as the second one. Now we found out that the second one was removed. But now here is the prediction that this power is going to try to change time as well as the law. And that would be tampering with God's seal, wouldn't it? Because we found out that the seal of God, the one commandment in the 10 that sets him apart and identifies him as the true God, that's the Sabbath commandment. Well, don't you believe the devil would attack that one, my friends, that God used especially to identify himself and to claim the authority to be worshiped by all men? Don't you believe the devil would attack that one especially? And so the prophet said he's going to try to change God's time in the law. And so he attacked that fourth commandment. What does the fourth commandment say? The seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. Well, obviously, he has attacked it and done something to it, because today most people don't keep the seventh-day Sabbath, do they? No, they don't. Then what happened? How did the devil attack that law and that particular commandment to try to change that particular time that's mentioned in the law? How did it happen? Surely back there in the days of the apostles, they were keeping the seventh-day Sabbath. We know that. The Bible makes that very plain. But there were other people, my friends, that were keeping a different day. And that was the pagan sun worshipers. They had their own day, you know. They worshiped the sun god. They were called Mithras back there in those days. And they had their own special day of worship, and they called it the venerable day of the sun. And they worshiped their sun god on that. Millions of those sun worshipers back there worshiped the sun god. And I'll tell you something else. There was a movement that developed after 200 A.D. Now, until 200 A.D., my friends, nobody kept any day but the seventh-day Sabbath. All right? The seventh-day Sabbath was observed right down 200 years after Christ. Then there began a movement to have one day a year to be observed in honor of the resurrection. All right, the Bishop of Rome wanted that day to be Sunday. the first day of the week. And it was to be observed just once during the year in honor of the resurrection. But all the other churches wanted it to come on the 16th of Nisan, which was the actual date in the Hebrew calendar for that the event took place. So they wanted to come on the 16th of Nisan, regardless of what day of the week it was on. But the Bishop of Rome insisted that it be on a Sunday. And so, 200 years after Christ, the church set up one day a year on a Sunday, which came to be known Easter Sunday, that was to be kept in honor of the resurrection. Had nothing at all to do with the Sabbath. The Sabbath was kept right on anyway. Then time went on, and then Lent was added to the church. You know, the 40 days before Easter. And by the way, that came right in out of paganism. The 40 days of weeping for Tammuz, the god of the sun. But it came right into the church. And so the church decided that they wanted to keep every Sunday during that 40-year period. And so they made that rule. See? But still, it had nothing to do with the Sabbath. The seventh-day Sabbath continued to be observed right on, as it had been by Christian people throughout those early years. Then we come down to the 4th century, 300 years after Christ. And at that time, they decided that they'd just keep every Sunday of the year in honor of the resurrection. Still had nothing to do with the seventh-day Sabbath. The Sabbath was observed, the seventh-day Sabbath, but they were keeping Sunday also in honor of the resurrection. So down to the 3rd century, my friend, the 4th century, I mean, to 300 A.D., the Sabbath was observed, but slowly they came in with this Sunday to keep it in honor of the resurrection. But not competing with the Sabbath, they're trying to push the Sabbath aside. Now, what happened in 300? Let me tell you something else very interesting that happened. Constantine was the old pagan, sun-worshiping emperor of the Roman Empire, and he was going out to fight a battle, the Battle of Milvian Bridge. And on the way, he thought he had a vision, and saw a cross, a flaming cross up in the sky, and underneath it said, "In this sign conquer." And he thought that meant that he should be a Christian in order to win his battles. So what did he do? He marched his army through a river, and he said, "Now you're all Christians." You see, he had the idea that his army also would have to be Christians in order to win the battles. So he marched them through a river and pronounced them all Christian. And he brought in all of these pagans, sun-worshiping pagans, into the church. Millions of them came at that time into the church. And my friends, Constantine made the first Sunday law. He made a secular law in the Roman Empire requiring everybody to keep the first day of the week instead of the 7th day of the week. And up to that time, they had all kept the Sabbath. He permitted certain occupations like farmers to continue at that time, but then later even that was set aside. And the Catholic Church adopted that. And in one church council after another, it became stronger and stronger that the first day of the week should be kept in place of the 7th. And so a tremendous persecution broke out in trying to eliminate the seventh-day Sabbath. And friends, that is the way. That is the way Sunday got in the church. You say, "Brother Joe, I just can't believe that this is the way it happened. And I'm going to prove this to you." I don't want you to take my word tonight for any of this. You can read these things in history. But right now, let me read you a statement or so from this first statement I'm going to read you is right out of a very authentic history book. It's Dr. Gilbert Murray, who's a professor of Greek at Oxford University. Now, this man has several doctorate degrees after his name. And this statement is taken from his book, History of Christianity in the Light of Modern Knowledge. He says, "Now since Mithras was the sun, the unconquered, the religion looked for a king whom it could serve as a representative of Mithras upon earth. The Roman emperor seemed to be clearly indicated as the true king. In sharp contrast to Christianity, Mithraism recognized Caesar as the bearer of divine grace, and its worshippers filled the legions and the civil service. It had so much acceptance that it was able to impose on the Christian world its own Sunday in place of the Sabbath. The sun's birthday, 25th December, is the birthday of Jesus." Now here's this great Greek scholar who, as far as I know, was not even a Christian. But he's writing a history book. And he says that all of this paganism of Mithraism coming into the church had so much power and so much influence that it was able to impose on the world its own Sunday, its own day of worship, if you please, The venerable day of the sun, when they worshiped the sun on the first day of the week, it was able to impose that upon the Christian world and also bring in its son's birthday, December 25th. And that is actually how it happened. I could read you statement after statement here. Dr. William Frederick says this in his book. He says the Gentiles were an idolatrous people who worshiped the sun, and Sunday was their most sacred day. Now, in order to reach the people in this new field, it seems but natural as well as necessary to make Sunday the rest day of the church. At this time, it was necessary for the church to either adopt the Gentiles' day or else have the Gentiles change their day. To change the Gentiles' day would have been an offense and stumbling block to them. The church could naturally reach them better by keeping their day. And so they did. They took in this pagan day of the sun that had been dedicated to the sun god and made it the worship day of the church. And the Sabbath was pushed aside. And the pagan day of the sun came in. Now you say, Brother Joe, are these facts? If it was not facts, my friends, I would not dare to speak these things tonight. But in order to give you greater evidence, I am now going to share with you some statements that will be utterly shocking and unbelievable to you. First of all, I'm going to read you another historical statement from another encyclopedia. I could read to you from the Encyclopedia Britannica. I could read you from Chambers' Encyclopedia. Almost any of the older encyclopedias, you can read what I'm telling you tonight very clearly. It's in the pages of history. Chambers' Encyclopedia says this: unquestionably, the first law, either ecclesiastical or civil, by which the sabbatical observance of Sunday is known to have been ordained is the Sabbath Edict of Constantine, 321 AD. So that tells us how that first Sunday law was put into operation. Now, friends, what I'm going to do is to turn to the Catholic Church. And you can read these statements for yourself as I read them here. And you will find some of the most astounding admissions made. These next few statements that I'm going to read to you are taken out of the official catechisms of the Church of Rome. Every one of them is an authentic statement out of one of the recognized catechisms that is published by the Catholic Church. I have most of these catechisms in my own library. You can check them out in any library you want to, and you'll find them exactly as I'm reading them. The first one is from Peter Gierman's catechism, the Convert's Catechism of Catholic Doctrine. Question: which day is the Sabbath day? Saturday is the Sabbath day. Question: why do we observe Sunday instead of Saturday? We observe Sunday instead of Saturday because the Catholic Church and the Council of Laodicea transferred the solemnity from Saturday to Sunday. Now, friends, the Catholic Church claims that they made the change. When that pagan day of the sun came in and Constantine made that first secular Sunday law, the church took it up and began to enforce it as a religious day. And so they claim we made the change. And these statements that I'm going to read to you now are the boast of the Catholic Church, saying it's our work and we're the ones who made the change. This is from Henry Tuberville's catechism entitled An Abridgment of Christian Doctrine. How do you prove that the church had the power to change feast and holy days? Answer: by the very act of changing Sabbath into Sunday, which Protestants allow of, and therefore they fondly contradict themselves by keeping Sunday strictly and breaking most other feasts commanded by the same church. Isn't that interesting? It says that they accept this law that we made about keeping Sunday, but they don't accept the other laws that we made about other feast days. This is a book by Father John Walsh. I have this book in my library. It was published in 1959. And here's what this catechism says. You can probably get this same book in a Catholic bookstore. Question: what obligation was imposed on the Israelites by the third commandment of God? Now, they call the third commandment, of course, the Sabbath commandment. Answer: the Jews were obliged to devote the Sabbath, the seventh day of the week, to rest and religious observance. Question: does this commandment still remain in force? Answer: yes, it remains as operative today as it was in the time of the Israelites. One day each week must be set aside as sacred to God. But the Catholic Church transferred the observance from the seventh to the first day of the week. That was published in 1959 by the Catholic Church, in which they said, we made the change. And the day is now the first day instead of the seventh day because we so command. This is a doctrinal catechism by Stephen Keenan. Question, have you any other way of proving that the church has the power to institute festivals of precept? Answer, had she not such power, she could not have done that, in which all modern religionists agree with her. Notice that. In which all modern religionists agree with her. She could not have substituted the observance of Sunday, the first day of the week, for the observance of Saturday, the seventh day, a change for which there is no scriptural authority. The Catholic Church says if we didn't have authority and power to change God's law, then we could not have made the change of the Sabbath. And the world would not be keeping the first day if they had not accepted our authority in being able to make changes in God's law. This is another book that I have in my library, published in 1963, entitled Salvation, History, and the Commandments, published and written by a Jesuit priest. Nothing is said in the Bible about the change of the Lord's Day from Saturday to Sunday. We know of the change only from the tradition of the church, a fact handed down to us from the earliest times by the living voice of the church. That is why we find so illogical the attitude of many non-Catholics who say they will believe nothing unless they can find it in the Bible, and yet will continue to keep Sunday as the Lord's Day on the say-so of the Catholic Church. Now that's in my library, printed in 1963. The Catholic Church says what? We can't understand why Protestants continue to keep Sunday with only the authority of the Catholic Church behind it, nothing in the Bible about it, but they keep the day on the say-so of the church, and yet they don't keep the other festivals of the church. All right, here is another statement from John O'Brien's book, The Credentials of the Catholic Religion. This book is in all Catholic bookstores even today. I saw it not too long ago. You can get this book yourself, and here's what he says. But since Saturday, not Sunday, is specified in the Bible, isn't it curious that non-Catholics who profess to take their religion directly from the Bible and not from the church observe Sunday instead of Saturday? Yes, of course it's inconsistent. But this change was made about 15 centuries before Protestantism was born, and by that time the custom was universally observed. They have continued the custom, even though it rests on the authority of the Catholic Church and not upon an explicit text in the Bible. That observance remains as a reminder of the Mother Church from which the non-Catholic sects broke away. Like a boy running away from home but still carrying in his pocket a picture of his mother or a lock of her hair. I thought that was really interesting. The Protestants are keeping Sunday because they've run away from the Catholic Church. They've broken away from the Catholic Church, but they've taken along a little reminder of the Catholic Church by taking Sunday with them, because that's something that we set up for them, and they took it along with them, and it reminds them of the Catholic Church from which they broke away. From the Catholic Press newspaper, Sunday is a Catholic institution, and its claims to observance can be defended only on Catholic principles. From the beginning to the end of Scripture, there is not a single passage that warrants a transfer of weekly public worship from the last day of the week to the first. Now, here is something I really want you to pay special attention to. This is a letter that was written by Cardinal Gibbons in response to a letter that came to him asking if the Catholic Church claimed the change of the Sabbath as her mark. Now, this is the letter that went to them, asking if that was their mark. And here's the answer he wrote back. Of course, the Catholic Church claims that the change was her act. And the act is a mark of her ecclesiastical power and authority in religious matters. Now, there it is, friends. What did Cardinal Gibbons say? He said, we change the Sabbath. And that is a mark of our authority and our power. My friends, what did God give as the mark of His religious power? The Sabbath. He gave the Sabbath. He said, this is the mark of my authority. I'm the Creator God. You're to worship me, and you're to follow me and obey me. The Catholic Church comes and says, no, we changed the Sabbath, and we're giving you Sunday, the first day of the week. And you keep that in recognition of our power and authority to even change God's law, you see. And my friends, unfortunately, the world follows the Catholic Church instead of following what God said. In fact, now let me read you a statement by a Catholic priest who was the president of Redemptorist College in St. Louis, Kansas City, Missouri, rather, and here is an offer he made. Listen closely. He said, I have repeatedly offered $1,000 to anyone who can prove to me from the Bible alone that I'm bound to keep Sunday holy. There is no such law in the Bible. It is a law of the Holy Catholic Church alone. The Bible says, remember that thou keep holy the Sabbath day. The Catholic Church says, no, by my divine power I abolish the Sabbath day and command you to keep holy the first day of the week. And lo, the entire civilized world bows down in reverent obedience to the command of the Holy Catholic Church. What did the prophecy say that we read a moment ago, friends? That the whole world would do what? Follow the beast. That's what it said. Are they doing it tonight? Of course they are. They're following the beast. And this Catholic priest boasts of that. He says, God says keep the seventh day. We say keep the first day. And the whole world is following us, bowing down in reverent obedience to the Catholic Church. Now, friends, I want you to listen to something that is really hair-raising and startling and alarming. I'm going to read you now from the statements of Protestantism. You say, Brother Joe, do Protestant churches understand the things that you presented here tonight? Do they know that the Sabbath is really the seventh day of the week and that the first day of the week is really not the day to be kept holy? Indeed, my friends, the great denominations of Protestantism have acknowledged this. And here are statements to prove it. Now, these things I'm going to read to you are taken right out of the very highest organs of publication in these churches. This is the Lutheran position, by the way. This is from the Augsburg Confession of Faith. And it says, the observance of the Lord's Day, Sunday, is founded not on any command of God, but on the authority of the church. The Lutheran Church says, Sunday is not in the Bible. It comes from the church, not from the Bible. The Presbyterian position. This is from Dwight's theology. The Christian Sabbath, Sunday, is not in the Scripture and was not by the primitive church called the Sabbath. From the Congregational, this is from Fowler's book. There is no command in the Bible requiring us to observe the first day of the week as the Christian Sabbath. The Methodist position, this is Dr. Amos Benny's theological compendium. He says it is true that there is no positive command for infant baptism, nor is there any for keeping holy the first day of the week. And the Methodist position again from Clovis Chapel. And here's a book you can get in any bookstore. I bought it not long ago myself. It's in my library. But Dr. Chappell says this, we ought to remember, this is in his book called 10 Rules for Living. We ought to remember that the Sabbath is God's gift to man. Notice he said the Sabbath is what? God's gift to man. We realize, of course, that our Sabbath is not the same as that observed by the Jews. Theirs was the seventh day of the week, while ours is the first. The reason we observe the first day instead of the seventh is based on no positive command. One will search the Scriptures in vain for authority for changing from the seventh day to the first. Our Christian Sabbath, therefore, is not a matter of positive command. It is a gift of the church. Now, Dr. Chappell, this great Methodist preacher, he says God gave the Sabbath. But he said the church gave the first day of the week. And it's not commanded in the Bible. It's a gift of the church, not a gift of God. The Episcopalian position, this is from Neander now, in his book, The History of the Christian Religion. The festival of Sunday, like all other festivals, was always only a human ordinance, and it was far from the intentions of the apostles to establish a divine command in this respect. Far from them and from the early apostolic church to transfer the laws of the Sabbath to Sunday. And so the Episcopalians say that there was no change made by God or in the Bible. Dr. R.W. Dale, another congregational source, he said it is quite clear that however rigidly or devotedly we may spend Sunday, we're not keeping Sabbath. The Sabbath was founded on a specific divine command. We can plead no such command for the observance of Sunday. There's not a single line in the New Testament to suggest that we incur any penalty by violating the supposed sanctity of Sunday. And now listen to this statement, one of the most amazing you've ever heard in your life by one of the greatest Baptist preachers who ever lived. Dr. Edward T. Hiscox is the author of the Baptist Manual. You'll find, in fact, in any Baptist bookstore, you'll find several manuals that he has written of Baptist doctrine. He says this. He says, there was and is a commandment to keep holy the Sabbath day, but that Sabbath day was not Sunday. It will be said, however, and with some show of triumph, that the Sabbath was transferred from the seventh to the first day of the week, with all its duties, privileges, and sanctions. Earnestly desiring information on this subject, which I've studied for many years, I ask, where can the record of such a transaction be found? Not in the New Testament, absolutely not. There is no scriptural evidence of the change of the Sabbath institution from the seventh to the first day of the week. Of course, he continues, I quite well know that Sunday did come into use in early Christian history as a religious day, as we learn from the Christian fathers and other sources. But what a pity that it comes branded with a mark of paganism and christened with the name of the sun god when adopted and sanctioned by the papal apostasy and bequeathed as a sacred legacy to Protestantism. Now, this great Baptist preacher has preached my whole sermon tonight in this one paragraph. He's given it all. He has said every single thing that I've told you tonight. He said Sunday is not in the Bible. It came from paganism, and it bears the mark of paganism. It was christened with the name of the sun god. I told you that. It was adopted and sanctioned by the papal apostasy. I proved that to you from the writings of Rome. And then it was bequeathed as a sacred legacy to Protestantism. And we know that happened because we see that it's here. It's being kept by them. It was passed on to them as a gift from Catholicism, who got it from paganism. So, friends, there is my whole sermon tonight. Isn't that interesting? Now, in contrast to all of that, I point you to the seal of God. The commandment that God wrote with His own finger. He said, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the Sabbath day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. There's God's seal, my friends. And God says, if you keep this day, you're keeping what I blessed, what I sanctified, what I commanded, and what I've set up as a divine memorial of my power and my authority. He said, keep that Sabbath, all of you, the whole world.